Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to webinar series Challenges of Expanding Access to Health Products in Fight Against Neglected Tropical Diseases. This webinar is organized by Japan Alliance on Global Neglected Tropical Diseases, JAGntd, and sponsored by Global Health Innovative Technology Fund, JHIT Fund. My name is Kota Yoshioka, Assistant Professor at the Institute of Tropical Medicine, Nagasaki University. And it's my pleasure to have you all in today's session. This webinar is designed to discuss key access challenges in the field of NTDs. Today's session is its fifth one. And in the previous session in December last year, we talked about ESPEN, which is a WHO's special project to eliminate 5 NTDs in Africa. And I think in the last webinar, we could learn how and why ESPEN helps African countries to distribute those medicines. So just as a reflection, let me see what my co-moderator learned from the previous session. Isaac, please introduce yourself and share one striking point from the previous session.
Thank you very much, Yoshioka-san. I'm Isaac, the Senior Director for Access and Delivery at the JHIT Fund. I think my reflection from the last session was having an understanding of how the WHO is supporting African countries through the ESPEN initiative to control NTDs. But I think what I really learned is the gaps that were highlighted by the work that ESPEN is doing. We heard that ESPEN is only focusing on 5 of the 20 NTDs, and a lot has been done for those 5 diseases, but a lot more still needs to be done for the other 15. But we also heard that part of the work that ESPEN does is driven by the products that are currently available. So they can only support the procurement, delivery, and implementation of what is available. And we know that for the other 15 diseases, probably because we don't have that many tools. So today I'm hoping to learn from Access to Medicine to see what they are doing to try to encourage industry to make sure that we have those tools, and hopefully the work of ESPEN can cover more of the 20 diseases. Thank you.
Okay, very nice comment. You made a nice connection to today's session. Thank you. Yeah, and I also learned a lot from the previous session. And what I learned the most is that creating access requires lots of coordination, logistics, and management. And that's why ESPEN has been and will be necessary for African countries to keep NT drugs available. And without ESPEN, maybe we can imagine, without ESPEN, many of the donated drugs could run to waste. And I hope in the future, one day, African countries can distribute these NTDs drugs without external assistance like ESPEN, but that day does not seem to come right now. Great. So on this reflection from the previous session, let's get started with today's session. So today's topic is Access to Medicine Foundation. And this foundation is a non-profit organization trying to stimulate pharmaceutical companies to improve access to medicine, particularly in low and middle income countries. And the foundation publishes the Access to Medicine Index to rank pharma companies. So let's see how this foundation has changed the culture of the pharma industry so far towards better access. And then we also explore a view of a Japanese investment company that has endorsed Access to Medicine Foundation. Okay, let me invite today's first speaker, Ms. Margo Warren from the Access to Medicine Foundation. She will talk about how the foundation sees Japanese companies' performance, particularly in the field of NTDs. So please go ahead, Margo.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here today, and it's a really nice opportunity to be able to speak more about the work of the Access to Medicine Foundation and how the Access to Medicine Index is motivating companies, and particularly Japanese companies. Going to just set up the presentation right now. So just a little bit about the Access to Medicine Foundation for those of you who may not be as aware of our work. The foundation is intended to guide and stimulate pharmaceutical companies to improve access to medicine and also to limit drug-resistant infections. We've been around for more than a decade. And what's also important to note is that we are completely independent from the pharmaceutical industry. So we do not accept any funding from pharma. We're funded by the UK government, the Dutch government, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Helmsley Charitable Trust, AXA Investment Managers, and the Wellcome Trust. In terms of our pathways of influence, it's much more than just the Access to Medicine Index or our antimicrobial resistance benchmark. It's really about, first and foremost, building multi-stakeholder consensus on what the responsibilities of the pharmaceutical industry actually are. And that's done through a very wide consultation process with a variety of different global health actors, so governments, private foundations, civil society, as well as the companies themselves, to make sure that there is this external accountability mechanism that's supported by the broader global health community. The index itself is actually creating non-financial incentives and a race to do better. And that's done through this independent accountability mechanism that companies buy into and feel is an appropriate measure of their work, but it also offers them this opportunity to sort of compete with one another on the actual index to improve their performance, ultimately having the impact of increasing access to medicine in the low and middle income countries in the scope of our work. Another important part of our work is actually sharing best practices. And we do so by highlighting these best practices in the context of our publications. When a company is doing something really well, we feel it's important to make sure that that is included in our publications and that we talk about it throughout the year as well, and we're able to sort of share those best practices. These are important because it means that other companies can see what their peers are doing and what their peers are receiving credit for. And it can sometimes be a really encouraging factor to help other companies actually follow suit if they see that one of their peers is actually doing something that perhaps they thought was not possible or something that no other company would do. When we can demonstrate that one company actually is doing something and is moving, it can really help other companies as well. And lastly, we do a lot of strategic change making that actually tends to happen behind the scenes. But it's really important because we have a variety of different teams in the Access to Medicine Foundation, a government engagement team, a company engagement team, and an investor engagement team. And across those teams, we can utilize the broad collective network to continuously push companies in the right direction, to guide them, and to really ensure that other stakeholders are also sort of echoing our sentiments and our key findings and conversing about the key opportunities for each company. We also feel that media coverage is particularly important. This is because companies like to see their best practices in the media, and they also don't want to see sort of negative elements of their work in the media. So it can be quite a motivating factor when we do get significant global media coverage. For our work with investors, we actually have over 100 signatory investors managing over 25 trillion in US dollars in terms of assets under management. So what's interesting here is that the individual companies are able to talk with the pharmaceutical companies and really have an interesting dialogue about where they can improve their performance, what they can be doing better. The investment companies can then say, you know, we saw that you really improved on the index. This was really great to see, or we saw that your performance dropped. And this can be, again, another really important change-making tool, which I think we'll hear a little bit more about in the next presentation as well. Just to note, there are 5 Japanese investment companies that are signatory investors of the Access to Medicine Index. We also work directly with global health stakeholders. As I mentioned, it's sort of important for us to ensure that there is a collective effort and a cohesive voice when speaking to the companies, and we know that other actors can be really influential as well. Of course, we work also quite closely with the JHIT Fund additionally. The way that we encourage companies to take action, as I mentioned, it's not just in the publication where we demonstrate their performance, but it's also throughout the cycle of the index, which is on a 2-year basis. So during that time, we host sessions, which we call Amsterdam sessions. We bring together a variety of different individuals, both from the industry and from different sectors like governments, private foundations, multilaterals, academic experts, and we can unpack specific issues. And this offers us an opportunity to really unpack some critical issues, see where the challenges are, have a really open dialogue about what more companies can be doing. And again, they can hear from their peers what were some of the challenges that their peers experienced and how did they overcome them. And this can be a really helpful way to move companies forward. Just a little bit of a sort of image of how this all comes together. So ultimately, again, our mission is to guide and stimulate these companies to bring products to people in low and middle income countries. And we do this through our research reports as a key output, but we're also driving action across these different sectors and utilizing them to continuously converse with the industry and highlight these key points, ultimately with a goal of increasing access to medicine in those low and middle income countries that we focus on. So just to unpack some of the performance of Japanese companies and to highlight a few areas of progress that we have seen over the years and some access barriers. In 2019, we were able to do a longitudinal analysis that had about a decade worth of data. That was really interesting for us because it was the first time that we could really look over the course of a longer period of time and see what the impact has been on particular access issues. Where did we see progress? Where did we not see as much progress? What was interesting for us in this longitudinal analysis was that we actually did see some significant movement from Japanese companies. At the beginning of the index, they tended to sort of rank towards the bottom of the index, and they weren't as involved as we would have liked them to be. And this has changed over the years, for sure. We also saw that all 4 companies tracked by the foundation as of today are now active in R&D for neglected tropical diseases. So that is a really nice thing that we were able to see over the years. We also saw, for example, just looking at sort of when the Japanese companies joined the NTD R&D space, we saw Eisai being sort of the only Japanese company that was actually active in between the first index and the 2012 London Declaration on NTDs. And then we saw Astellas and Takeda actually enter the field as well. Finally, Daiichi Sankyo entered in 2014 following the formation of the JHIT Fund. So it was a really key influencer in bringing these Japanese companies to the table when it comes to R&D for neglected tropical diseases. And now all 4 of these companies are actually JHIT Fund partners, which was really nice to see. We also encourage companies by guiding and incentivizing them and rewarding them in the context of the index to participate in the JHIT Fund and DNDi and to partner for R&D for neglected tropical diseases. So it is really nice to see when these mechanisms do work and we can really bring new companies to the table and really grow the amount of companies that are engaged in R&D for neglected tropical diseases. Specifically, when we look at the number of projects that are targeting NTDs, this has actually risen quite substantially also over the past 2 years since 2018. So from from 80 to 85, which was great to see. But this is also up from only 38 in 2014 from the companies that are in scope of the Access to Medicine Index. So this has been a really substantial growth in the amount of projects targeting neglected tropical diseases. However, some caveats and areas of improvement. We've seen that in 2021, our analysis showed that there were only 2 recently approved products targeting NTDs. So we want to see more movement into that approval phase. We also tend to find that the majority of projects targeting NTDs are still in the discovery or preclinical phase of development. So again, while that's positive to see that there are new projects, we want them to be moving through the pipeline. We want them to be getting to phase 2 and onwards, and then of course being fully approved is the main goal. One thing to note as well that can be a barrier is that the Access to Medicine Foundation really encourages companies to think quite strategically about access planning. So what that means is that in phase 2 and onwards, companies are thinking strategically about how they will make a product available and affordable in low and middle income countries. So we really want to see that all late stage projects would have an access plan attached. This is really important to ensure global access. In the NTD space, 15 of the projects actually do have an access plan out of 17 late stage NTD projects. So this is actually pretty good and it's above the average overall. But we would really want to see all of those projects have an access plan attached to them. And this is an important part of what we're continuing to sort of discuss and have conversations with companies about, because this is really important, particularly in the NTD space where we know it can be very prohibitive in terms of price, and global access is really important. One thing also to note when we're just thinking about the pipeline, what we also see as a key gap is R&D for vaccines. At the moment, there's only 2 companies. So Eisai is the sole company developing a Chagas vaccine, and Takeda is the sole company developing a vaccine for chikungunya. So that's a really interesting point to note, in that these 2 Japanese companies are actually the only ones that are developing vaccines for these particular NTDs. And we tend to find that the development of vaccines for NTDs is lower than for therapeutics. So moving on to NTD donation programs. So the Access to Medicine Index looks at how companies are remaining engaged and committed to ensuring access to their donated products for diseases where NTD elimination, eradication, and control goals are possible. So this is another area where we've seen some progress over the years. There are currently 14 NTD donation programs for which 11 companies are actually donating products, and this can range as well between 1 and 74 different countries. We've also seen the number of companies engaging in donation programs grow over the years, as well as the actual number of the programs themselves, which has been positive to see. However, Eisai is the only Japanese company that is actually publicly committing to eliminating an NTD, which is LF, through its program, and it's active in 24 countries. So that's very positive to see from Eisai. Something that's also, I think, interesting to note is that in the 10-year analysis, we were able to see sort of where there has been a lot of progress in specific disease areas. As I mentioned, we were really happy to see very strong progress in the NTD space, particularly for R&D and for these structured donation programs. Something that's interesting as we did the analysis was to sort of look at the different factors that may have played into this growth in attention and ultimately leading to a growth in projects and products that are being developed. And that was the 2012 London Declaration on NTD. So these big platforms where companies are committing to new engagement, they're sharing progress, they're being tracked. That's a really important way to encourage further action. And we've seen some positive momentum come out of that, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation. We also find that the GHIT Fund and DNDi are really notable drivers of R&D. So when companies feel that they can partner with different organizations, it can be a de-risking factor, and they know that there's a bit of market shaping, and it reduces the uncertainty of if there will be sort of funding to support the project, for purchasers once the product is on the market. So these mechanisms can be quite important as well. And tied to that, of course, is long-term and coordinated financial support from multiple donors. This global health attention has also contributed as well. And when they know that there are going to be investments to support elimination, eradication, and control programs. But I'd also like to talk about some of the clear improvements on the Access to Medicine Index. We've been really happy to see, as I mentioned, Japanese companies actually improve their performance quite significantly. One example is that Takeda actually jumped 10 places from 2016 to 2018, jumping into the top 5. And they've maintained a top 10 spot in 2021. So that movement upwards was really positive to see and meant that the company was really looking strategically across all of the different areas of the index and thinking about how they can do better and how they can improve their performance. We've also seen some of the other Japanese companies, Eisai, Astellas, and Daiichi Sankyo move up as well. As I mentioned, sort of at the beginning of the index, they tended to trend towards the bottom, and they're moving up sort of consistently throughout the years, which is really nice to see as well. I'd like to talk really briefly about some of the recent company achievements in NTDs. So the Access to Medicine Index for 2022 will come out at the end of the year, and this is where some of these achievements may also be noted. But just a few things I think that are worth noting is that Takeda actually received a 2021 Project of the Year in Drug Discovery by DNDi. It's really interesting that, with support also from the GHIT Fund, this partnership is aiming to advance an optimized lead to deliver a preclinical candidate compound for visceral leishmaniasis, hopefully by 2023. So that's really positive news. We've also had some positive news about the dengue vaccine from Takeda. So its long-term safety has been reinforced and found to be fairly successful in preventing hospitalizations and illness overall. So that was a positive thing to see recently as well. Eisai has started in collaboration the first human trial for a new drug targeting LF, which is really positive. Additionally, that's with support from the GHIT Fund and a variety of other partners. So we're really happy to see that progressing as well. And then some best practices. As I mentioned, the index captures these best practices. We highlight them as such in the Access to Medicine Index, and we continue to promote them throughout the course of the development of the next index, so we can see if other companies are following suit and how they're thinking about what these best practices look like and maybe how they can also continue to move forward on them. So Eisai received a best practice in the past Access to Medicine Index. So along with a few other companies, they made a commitment to donate medicines for an indefinite amount of time until the elimination of a specific NTD in endemic countries. So that was a really positive, strong commitment. And since 2013, Eisai actually has been publicly committed to this program. They're partnering with WHO, and it's aiming to eliminate LF by donating their specific product, DEC, in endemic countries, which is really nice to see. And additionally, Takeda has also received a best practice. They have an approach to systematically plan for access across all projects in their pipeline, which is really what we want to see from all companies, not only for specific projects, for specific diseases, but really across their whole portfolio. And they've made that commitment this year. And it's really great to see them sort of taking leadership on this with several other companies, but really moving forward. And to demonstrate that, they also have a really strong access plan for the dengue vaccine specifically. So they have plans to file for WHO pre-qualification and also looking at distribution networks, temperature controlled global distribution, for example. So they're really thinking strategically about how are they going to make this available and affordable quite soon. One of the things that we also look for in the index is key opportunities for how companies can be sort of building on what they're already doing well, or areas where they might be able to do better. And something that we've identified for Takeda is that because they've had such a strong commitment to access planning, and that they've demonstrated through this dengue vaccine access planning that it can be done. We'd love to see this example of a strong plan for neglected tropical diseases actually translate to other areas of their portfolio more broadly, say cancer treatments and complications in premature birth for projects that are in the pipeline. So an interesting example of how the NTD space has actually been, really instrumental in pushing companies to think more strategically, and they should be applying some of these lessons learned from the NTD space to other areas of their portfolio and other areas of the company themselves. So that's the end of the presentation, and I'll pause there.
Thank you very much, Margo. Could you, yep. So yeah, I think that was a very interesting presentation, including very concrete examples of the Japanese pharmaceutical company. And I think there are lots that have been done by Japanese companies. Okay, so now let me invite the second speaker, Mr. Shinichi Kohguchi from Sumitomo Mitsui Trust Asset Management. So from an investor's perspective, Mr. Kohguchi will talk about the influence and the potential of the Access to Medicine Index in Japan. And he will speak in Japanese, so please check again your language settings on your Zoom screen. Kohguchi-san, please start your presentation.
And Margo-san, thank you very much. So I am from the Sumitomo Mitsui Trust Asset Management Co. Ltd. I'm doing the medical type of medical access. My name is Shinichi Kohguchi, and as an investor, what we are going to working on, let me introduce that. And talking about Access to Medicine Foundation, I would like to comment about your evaluation towards us. And as an institutional investor, let me introduce our ESG activities. And responsible institutional investor to achieve sustainable growth for the company and the society. And by encouraging companies to solve ESG issues through the business, starting off with, so the sustainability is what we try to realize. Specifically speaking, in 2006, PRI, United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, we became the member, and various global initiatives we are signed off to join. Climate Action 100 Plus, and climate change, and also the FAIRR, and then Access to Medicine Foundation, invest in activation on AMR and diversity-wise, and 30% Club, we are also signed off, and various global initiatives we are joining. And the engagement, in order to engage the ESG, we have 12 challenges from top-down engagement activity we are doing. Environment, social, government, governance. So various theme we just set. And S, social area, we have health and safety projects. And amongst there, especially improvement of medicinal access, we focus on, and Margo-san, so we would Access to Medicine Foundation, we signed off. And the first Japan's investor, institutional investor has signed off in Japan. And so investor action AMR, so the resistance to the drugs, as a foundational member, we are proactively giving our opinions. And this is our company's ATA activity, Access to Medicine activities in Japan. And this is our system here. And SMTAM is the us, talking about our company, and Sumitomo Mitsui Trust Asset Management. We have New York, Tokyo, and London hubs. Tokyo as a center, New York members and London members are collaborating together to achieve, to conduct the Access to Medicine activities.
In New York, we have US pharmaceuticals, including Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, to which we have engagement activities. For more detailed outcome of such engagement activities, you can go to our webpage for your reference. And I live in Tokyo. We look at Japan's pharmaceutical companies. Takeda, Astellas, Daiichi Sankyo, and Eisai are 4 companies involved, and we periodically exchange opinions. And as a lead manager, Astellas Pharmaceuticals is really active in having discussions with us from the top management, so we can really change the behavior of those companies. Well, in ATM areas, we have Shionogi and Otsuka Seiyaku Pharmaceuticals that we are working with. Regarding London members, we have EU Pharmaceuticals, to which London members have activities with, and ATM and London members do engage and work together. As Margo explained already, that was the Access to Medicine Index, which was already explained. So I'm not going to go into detail of that, but how does Access to Medicine Index impact Japanese companies? Well, I think the biggest thing is that external evaluation has taken place and has raised the awareness of access to the top management levels. So conventionally, access to medicine has been very important, and I think top management did think about that, but in concrete terms, now there are external evaluations, and then top managements are made to be aware of the need to make commitments. I think that is the understanding that top management now have. And Access to Medicine Foundation's activity is one thing, but at the same time, SDGs is a trend, not only in Japan, but also globally, of course. But in Japan, we see more penetration of these SDGs in order to help improve the access to medicine, which I think is a tailwind trend. As mentioned already, in Japan, Takeda got the highest rating. And then the CEO of that company is Mr. Weber. He has exerted his leadership to improve access to medicine. And he started to be engaged more actively with Access to Medicine Foundation. Regarding Takeda, there is an Access to Medicine team, which is a dedicated team. I think this is the only team dedicated in Japan's pharmaceutical companies. They're located in Singapore. It's really systematic in terms of the way that they work. They allocate management resources really systematically. They also invest in a different way from other 3 companies. They invest much more than other 3 pharmaceutical companies in Japan. When we talk with Mr. Weber, we talk about the previous year's ranking, like it used to be 5th and now it's 6th. So they're doing really good. So I tell them like, yeah, let's keep that momentum up. And the world is evaluating you really highly. So we will support you, Takeda. And yep, let's try more and improve more in terms of the access to medicine. That's what we talk about. Regarding Eisai, well, Mr. Naito is a CEO who took office 30 years ago. And since then, human health care is the corporate philosophy that's been up and put into practice. And a social contribution activity comes at the center of this HHC. I think access to medicine is the area that Eisai is one of the pioneers. As mentioned already, lymphatic filariasis needs to be eliminated, of course, and then efforts made by Eisai is very good, and I am really proud of being a Japanese because of that, because their contributions are huge. And then next is Astellas. Well, previously, they were not so active in access to medicine score and activity. They're ranked 14th. It's not too high. Now the CEO is Yasukawa, and the CEO needs to have a higher awareness about access to medicine. So the newly made midterm strategy or plan includes access to health. It's not medicine, which sounds interesting, I think. It's not only about medicine, it's about the health as a whole that Astellas is going to work towards. So Astellas used to be a little bit behind, but now the CEO's leadership means that they're trying to catch up. And regarding Chagas disease, they've been working on NTDs elimination. There is a really clear commitment from Astellas. And then we talk about a life cycle access to medicine project that they're trying to set up from the R&D phase after commercialization. They need to have a consistent planning to be set up. So that's the idea. From the beginning of R&D up to the post-loyalty phase, and the products are brought into developing countries. So that is the whole process that they're trying to set up really consistently. In 2022, they will be able to establish that consistent process. And after that's set up, I think they will be ranked even higher. Maybe next index may show the biggest improvement in terms of Astellas. Next is Daiichi Sankyo. As Margo already talked about this company, she was quite positive about this company, but this company is ranked 16th. So they're a little bit behind than other companies. They have a midterm management plan that includes access improvement to medicine. So there are 8 important materialities, and one of them is this. And access to health has a head of a department. So they place that head in 2021, and they will be more serious and more focused in improving the access to healthcare. They have already made that declaration. What I'm focused on is this. Well, oncology area is really a difficult area to improve access in developing countries. But by working with Astellas, oncology products could improve its access. That's one of the plans there. They can also work with NGOs to improve the local healthcare systems in developing countries. So this initiative will also help Daiichi Sankyo improve their ranking. So access to medicine challenges are shown here. The first one is this. Well, there are some characteristics of the 20 companies in the index that varies. They have company size, history, regional characteristics, and others that are different. Compared to European companies, Japanese companies are not so much active in African countries. Compared to US companies, Japanese companies are less involved in Latin American companies. So when we think about Japanese companies, Africa or Latin America are the future market of healthcare industry. So it's not only about social contribution, but also as a business to really grow and generate a future market. From such viewpoint, these companies should be involved in access to medicine. Compared to Japanese mega pharmas, they're still small in scale. So doing a lot of projects globally may be difficult. So a good example is, as I said, is an elimination effort for lymphatic filariasis by Eisai. It's really a complete elimination as an effort. They're trying to really delve deeply into this initiative, which we would like to evaluate more going forward. Another thing is this. Because the business model is now changing drastically. For example, Daiichi Sankyo is changing its business model. So they're now trying to focus more on oncology. or some of the rare diseases. And in case of Eisai, Alzheimer's disease, and it's a dementia, is the treatment they're focusing on as a company. And then from the access to medicine standpoint, it may not be 100% evaluated, but whether it's oncology, as Daiichi Sankyo is trying to focus more on, they can improve the access in developing countries. When they think about it from different perspectives, there are many things that they can do. I think that's what I am asking these companies for their further thoughts. And a third point is uncertainty in evaluation items, because every 2 years, access to medicine indexes are evaluated, I think. And then every time it is made, the focus is different, which cannot be helped. But when we look at Japanese companies, they're really serious. Like they're evaluated, they're given feedback, and they really focus on those feedback or improvement areas. And then they work on it. And then they say, look, we have done it, but the evaluation items are changed. And then sometimes Japanese companies are really let down or disappointed. And some of the persons in charge are really disappointed. CEOs are negative about what they have done. So the ranking is going down. So sometimes Japanese companies, person in charge, tend to feel disappointed with the change in evaluation items. So we want to work with them. Like we want to say to them, like, you're doing great. We want to encourage them and say, like, the next time, let's do it this way, that way. So we want them to really take a next step forward one by one. And then next one is about investors' issue or access to medicine foundations standpoint, maybe. Essentially, access to medicine index are used to evaluate companies. And then if they're evaluated highly, that should be reflected into stock price performance. But now when I see the current status, the ATM index and stock price performance are not necessarily matched. The more they are highly evaluated, then the immediate price performance is not good, which is a bad situation. For example, Takeda in Japan is one of the worst in terms of the stock price performance, although their rating is really high. So access to medicine needs to be understood as something very meaningful and valuable. We need to tell them repeatedly. We need to talk to the stock price markets, and we need to talk to the society in general. We need to talk to the media so that the situation gets changed. Otherwise, people will not pay attention to this access to medicine issues. And stock price performance is one of the scorecards for top management. They may be demotivated if this is not really linked. So we want to work with these companies so that this will happen. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kohguchi-san. Very interesting presentation again. So, Isaac, are you here?
Yes,
Start our discussion part. I think you are excited.
Yeah, thank you very much, both presenters, for the very lively presentations. We have some very interesting questions coming up from the audience, but I just wanted to start by mentioning that there is a historical connection between JAGnt and the Access to Medicines Foundation. And it is really the seeds for the foundation of JAGnt came from a discussion about the Access to Medicines Index. There was a concern that Japanese companies were not really performing that well, not just on the index, but that was an indication that they were probably not investing that much, or they didn't have a policy environment that was really conducive to investing in R&D for neglected populations, for example. So that's how the discussion started about, so what can be done to improve this, to have Japanese companies, Japanese innovation, Japanese technologies actually contributing to global health. And the JAGnt was one of the tools that was sort of created to really moved Japanese companies into this area. And it's no surprise that the 4 companies on the index are, the founding partners, some of the founding partners for JHIT. And really, I think what it shows is that even though they might be ranked, 15 or 20, the fact that they are part of JHIT, it means, and they're on the index, it means they're inherently, they inherently believe in the principles of improving access to medicines. And as Kohguchi-san mentioned, it's not just about access to medicines, it's about the impact this access to medicine improvement will have on the populations that need these diseases. So really that's quite encouraging to have those companies in there, and hopefully more Japanese companies will go into this area. This is related to one of the questions that's coming from the audience. Actually, I'll ask it a bit later on to both presenters. So my first question is to Margo. You mentioned the non-financial incentives. This is really an interesting concept. I see this being quite effective in encouraging companies to improve policy and having best practices. How effective do you think it is in actually translating these best practices into best actions, like actual investments into R&D and delivery of tools? Over to you, Margo.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the other presentations. It's been really nice to hear from others as well. I would say in terms of non-financial incentives, it is really powerful because it does act as a motivating factor for companies to, say, partner with JHIT Fund or with the NDI, when in other ways they may feel less inclined to do so. So because we're able to offer them what is essentially a reward in the index in terms of their performance, in particular indicators related to R&D and other actions, it means that they are actually able to sort of be motivated by a different factor other than just sort of doing a more altruistic activity that they feel is important for global health. But it's sort of a win-win because they're able to partner and to create these new products that are, so needed in terms of neglected tropical diseases, but then their performance also improves as a result. And that sort of combination, as I mentioned in some of my slides, can be really powerful because it means there's this de-risking mechanism, there's additional support, they're not sort of going at it alone, but then in return for still taking that sort of risk financially, they are then still rewarded in the context of the Access to Medicine Index. And we have seen some really nice examples of that being sort of the case where they were moving forward because of it.
Thank you for that. I see Kohguchi-san nodding his head. Do you want to add something?
Japanese loves to be awarded. We feel honored more than money, especially the top management has that kind of feeling. Or so in Japan, it's like pretty much effective. You would just appreciate, like I would do exchange opinion with the CEOs, and I think it's effective mostly to reward or appreciate, recognize, and then they would grow.
Thank you for that. So just as a follow-up to that question for Kohguchi-san, so you mentioned that company, and this is a fact actually, that companies are moving away from infectious diseases, even some of the big global companies, more towards oncology and rare diseases. And this is probably driven by the business model. We have to understand that pharmaceutical companies are businesses, so they'll probably want to invest in where they could get more money. So what could be done to encourage, let's start with Japanese companies, to really at least reserve some space or some investments for NTDs? As you said, they want to be rewarded, but I think just words alone might not be enough to get the tools that we want. So what else could be done to really to be a driver for encouraging more companies to remain committed to NTDs or other infectious diseases? Over to you, Kohguchi-san.
Yes, the social meaning appealing the social meaning, I think that's most effective. SDGs, this big tide is here, and us investor side, we are given money. These kind of ESG and other social contribution, there are many customers or client would say a lot of money moving, they are requesting to invest such area. And I'm telling to the pharmaceutical company too, all the people's feeling is to the developing countries, medicinal access, and the neglected tropical disease, those areas, the R&D and access, logistics for the access to the medicine, those kind of things. How could it be more accessible to the medicine? You have to think about that, and people are wanting that. That the company to think about it. I gave the Daiichi Sankyo example. Before, the medical access, when you talk about that, like infectious disease, vaccine, that was the main topic area when you talk about that area. But they're trying to do that in oncology. And I think such company should, I mean, it's nice to have such company. And any drug will always, the patent will be expired. And existing sales route, you could leverage that. And without much cost investment, the access to medicine could be improved. That index 4 company, I'm now trying to appeal that kind of topic and point.
Thank you very much, Kohguchi-san. Your response is actually linked to a question that just popped up from one of the participants. We've been talking about investments, improving policies and investing into R&D for NTDs. But the question is about the actual delivery, and this is directed to Margo. So what is the Access to Medicine Foundation doing to actually ensure that the policy changes or the investments translate into affordability, accessibility, and the products are actually delivered to the people on the ground, beyond just looking at improving the investment framework?
It's a great question for sure, and it's certainly a huge part of the Access to Medicine Index as well. Not only, of course, are we looking for companies to invest more in R&D, but also to make sure that the products that are on the market that can be really valuable are available and affordable. So we have a whole product delivery section of the Access to Medicine Index. I showed just one figure that was looking at product donation programs. But we also look at equitable pricing strategies. We look at last mile, supply chain issues, what are companies doing to really ensure sustainable supply chains, and how are they partnering with local governments? What are they doing in terms of capacity building? And so there's a variety of different areas in the index that do look specifically at, again, that product delivery, making sure that something that is developed is actually reaching those most in need. As I mentioned, Intakeda's dengue strategy, for their access plan, they were looking at sort of the whole supply chain. What can they do to make sure that there's cold storage, things like that are really important when you think about how are you going to make this new potentially really efficacious product reach those most in need, and what are the considerations that you need to be thinking about across the supply chain all the way to when the person is actually receiving the product. So it's something that we definitely explore throughout the context of the index, and again, reward companies for their actions throughout that whole cycle in development all the way to when a person is actually getting the product they need.
Thank you very much. Another question for both of you. So there have been a lot of discussions about transparency, particularly on equity. How could that be improved from the companies that you're following? There is a subset of companies that both organizations are following. What can be done to improve this issue of equity? I think we have seen a lot about this issue on the COVID-19 vaccines and other tools. We'll start with Kohguchi-san, maybe. Sorry.
Well, the COVID-19 issue, the pandemic, equity access of equitable access, it's being a very tough, hurdle. And COVID-19 vaccine last year, we in equitable access, equitable supply, that release have been, as one party, we have been released such announcement to make it equitable access. Is there any solution? Not really, but we will make it's a right thing that everybody could, the equitable access to everyone is, people have to be aware of it. If everybody has a consensus, the government or the company cannot take those kind of against that activity. So it's the people's voice should be considered, and people should be aware to make voices to make change.
Thank you for that, Kohguchi-san. And I think it really ties in with what you mentioned in your presentation, that access to medicine needs to be taken more seriously than what is happening right. Thank you. Margo, your take on this?
I would certainly echo some of those sentiments. I think it's very important for the broader public to understand what access to medicine truly means on a global scale. And I think in the context of neglected tropical diseases, obviously these have been areas where patients have been neglected for a very long time, and people haven't really understood the importance of why, this needs to be prioritized. And I think COVID-19 has actually demonstrated to the world what it means to not have a vaccine that's developed for something that people really need. And I think there's a renewed sense of empathy a bit in terms of the general public and policymakers, and even within the companies, of truly understanding themselves what it's like to be worried about a disease that there's no vaccine or there's no treatment for, and understanding the importance of developing that for other disease areas such as neglected tropical diseases. And I think people are sort of understanding that this really does need to be prioritized on a deeper level than perhaps they had before COVID-19. But I do think it really is important that that message is sort of propelled, that other disease areas can't be neglected, and that this really, the problem of equity transfers to a lot of other different disease areas. It's not just COVID, and these messages of vaccine equity and making sure that everyone has access to tests and medicines, it needs to translate over to other disease areas as well. And that is my hope, that it will in some capacity have an influence on these other disease areas that also really do need new medicines developed, and that attention that we saw in vaccine development, for example, in COVID-19. Typically it takes 7 to 10 years to develop a vaccine, and all of a sudden we had it in a year because there was this attention. And if you applied that same attention to other disease areas, we might see a similar sort of rapid progress. And as I mentioned, there's only 2 Japanese companies that are working on vaccine development for neglected tropical diseases, and it's been a slower process, obviously, than COVID. But if you can take that attention and that power to be able to translate it to other disease areas, we could see really fast progress in other areas as well.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that. And unfortunately, time seems to fly every time. When you're having fun. We have a lot of questions that have not been answered. We have questions on IP, on TRIPS waiver, on malnutrition, RUTF, early R&D, and late R&D. So what we'll do is we'll send these questions to both you, Margo, and Kohguchi-san, and you give your answers. And then this will be put online together with the video recording of this session. But before we go, one last question to Margo. We understand that the Access to Medicine Foundation is expanding the scope beyond these 20 companies. Could you just give us a brief in like 30 seconds what this scope is going to look like?
Absolutely. So our 5-year strategic direction was just launched actually in December. And we realized throughout the past 2 years of COVID-19 that there were so many other sectors that are really valuable, not just for pandemic preparedness, but for health system strengthening overall, that should be included in our work and that are really valuable to building strong, resilient health systems. And we have seen the success of our model in large R&D-based companies and in the context of our work on antimicrobial resistance. And we wanted to expand that to other sectors. So we will be looking at generic medicine manufacturers, as well as low and middle income country vaccine manufacturers, looking at local production, looking at as well diagnostic manufacturers more specifically, as well as medical gas companies providing medical oxygen. And we sort of see these additional sectors as really the cornerstone, including large R&D based companies as well, as sort of that health system strengthening component and being able to build these resilient health systems to address this current pandemic until it's over and then prepare for the next ones, and also build back better and make sure that there are these strong systems in place for all other disease conditions and pathogens. So that's what we're looking forward to sort of in the next 5 years, and we're kicking it off in January. And our CEO, Jay Ira, just wrote a really good piece in the World Economic Forum blog on our new expansion. So happy to share that with others as well.
Thank you very much for that. Hopefully we'll see more Japanese companies and organizations in that expanded scope. Over to you, Yoshioka-san. My apologies for going over time.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much, Isaac and Kohguchi-san and Margo. I think today's discussion was very rich. But we should close our session because it's time. And just a last comment, I have two quick announcements. So in our next webinar session in Friday, we'll invite Medicine's patent pool to learn how patent pooling can improve access to medicine. And session details will be on the JAGntd's website as soon as possible. One more thing, January 13th is a World NTD Day. And in Japan, we are also planning to light up Tokyo Tower and Hakodate Goryakaku Tower and some bridges in Nagasaki City. And we also provide an online live event from 4 p.m. here in Japan time, talking about NTDs in Japan. So there is one more NTD time in this month. So please find more information too on the JAGntd's website, and you are all invited. So thank you all, and apologies for the time, and see you next webinar. Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks very much.